When the internet began, bulletin board services, or BBS, became the first online communities of the so-called information superhighway. Using their phone lines, people logged in from all over America to talk about sports, games, movies, and on one BBS in particular, share their ghost stories. Over time, those communities all went dark, except for one lone server that continues to operate somewhere in an unknown part of Pennsylvania's Rust Belt. A relic of the 1990s, veiled in mystery, it is a digital archive of humanity's strangest encounters with the unknown, as told by the people who experienced them. My name is Brandon Schexnayder, and you are listening to Fear Daily.
Subject: The Couch. User: Colomoust8. Posted June 18th, 1996.
When I moved out of my folks' house last year, I had almost nothing in the way of furniture. My first night in the apartment was spent on a mattress on the floor because my parents wanted to keep the old box spring for guests. Well, I guess they felt weird about that because 2 days later, my stepdad Walt showed up in our neighbor's truck hauling the old sofa we used to keep in the basement. It was surprisingly nice, sculpted, dark wood, and thick cushions, and you'd think it was a great gift unless you already knew, like I did, that it was haunted. Walt had always told us he'd found it in a downtown Columbus back alley in the 70s. It was the first piece of furniture he restored himself, so he was attached to it and brought it when we combined households. I remember him telling us in an offhand manner that it was haunted by a mean old bum. We thought he was messing with us, so we wouldn't jump on it or something. Then one night when I was 15, I fell asleep on it while watching TV. What woke me was the feeling of having my hair pulled hard. And it continued for a few seconds while I struggled to get out from under the blanket. My mom and Walt said it had been a dream, but I was pretty steamed up and told them to try it if they didn't believe. They laughed at me, but also elected not to sleep on the couch. My sister Sarah was next, and it was her who gave it the name Garble Man. It happened while she had some friends at our place for a sleepover down in the basement. The girls were talking, playing games, or whatever it is girls do at a sleepover when they all say something was suddenly standing behind the couch. Sarah says it looked like the outline of a man, but fuzzy as if it was made of TV static. The thing didn't move, but made strange, garbled sounds that scared the life out of them. Sarah said it was like the thing was trying to speak to them. Well, the girls all called their parents, begging to go home, and that was the end of my sister's basement sleepovers. As my mother got older, she got more into spiritual stuff and strange things. A year or two before I moved out, she finally decided to sleep on the couch in the basement, and she too met Garble Man. She says 2 hands bunched into fists were trying to push her off. She ran upstairs and slept in her own bed. It's not exactly Candyman level stuff, but it was enough to put her off the spirituality kick for a while. Knowing all of this, you can imagine I wasn't sure how to take Walt's gift, but a couch is a couch, and so I called a couple buddies to help me load it up into the apartment. It's been here ever since, so maybe a year now, and I've only made the mistake of sleeping on it once when I passed out watching Conan after work. Garble Man didn't make a visual appearance, but he gave my hair a good tug and ruined my experience of falling asleep to late-night TV. Now what I do is fall asleep watching TV on the floor, leaning against the couch, and it must be acceptable to him because he ain't given me trouble since. My cats, Bob and Doug, who hate each other, agree on one thing. The couch is a no-go zone. They'll sleep on my lap on the floor, they'll run around it, but they never set a single paw on it. Coincidentally, or maybe not, none of my buddies ever asked to crash at my place, and if someone needs to crash after a party, they pull the cushions off and use them to sleep on the floor. None of them know the couch's history, and when I ask them why they're on the ground, they just say they felt like it. I'm debating telling them, but kind of enjoy having the private joke to myself. Like Walt says, sometimes it's the little things. We haven't had any confrontations since the whole late-night TV incident, even though my buddies have accidentally spilled a few drinks on the sofa, and I like to think we've reached a kind of equilibrium. The way I figure it is, I'm content to have a dead bum sleeping in my living room, as long as he doesn't make any audible noises, manifest, or touch anything.
Subject, night hunting. User, Emmer1525. Posted July 19th, 1996.
My old man served in Vietnam, and when he came back, a lot about him had changed. The thing I noticed most was that he didn't have any fear. It was a good thing and a bad thing. Good because he didn't take shit from anybody. Bad because he would sometimes get us into sticky situations. The only bright side to all of this was that almost any situation Dad got us into, he could get us out of. The one time that wasn't true was on the final hunting trip we took with my little brother Gary, and in Dad's defense, I don't know there was anything anyone could have done. It was in summer 1975. After getting out of the service, Dad decided his new hobby was night hunting, which wasn't exactly legal in our state, but he never let that stop him. He said he could tell the animals apart by how far above the ground their eye shine was. Close to the ground was a hare, knee height was a boar, above that was a deer. Mom wasn't crazy about Dad taking us out into the woods at night with a gun, but she knew better than to complain. Post-war Dad didn't take criticism well, and besides, there was always meat in the freezer. Nothing about this night seemed any different than the others we'd gone out together. The sky was clear, it wasn't too cold, and the ground on the walkout was firm instead of spongy. There was something different about Dad, though. He seemed agitated and kept swinging the barrel of his rifle around behind him as if he was hearing something. Gary and I looked at each other baffled. Neither of us had heard anything. In fact, it was a surprisingly quiet night with not much in the way of game or ambient noise. Looking back, it was kind of like the forest was holding its breath. Sometime around 2 or 3 in the morning, Dad raised his fist, which was a sign for us to stop walking. He pointed toward a dark thicket, maybe 100 yards ahead, and sure enough, we heard a rustling sound. Gary and I knew what to do. Quietly, we set out to establish a pincer position on either side of the thicket, where we'd wait for Dad's signal to charge the bush and chase the animal out towards his rifle. We'd done this a bunch before, but there was an electricity in the air. The hair on my arms was standing up like we were walking into some kind of static buildup. I couldn't make out Gary's expression in the dark, but his posture was tense. At Dad's signal, we did what he'd trained us to do, but what came out of that bush was no boar or hare or anything like that. It was huge, dark, and had wings big enough to brush both mine and Gary's face as it took off. We're talking a span of maybe 15 to 20 feet. The air it displaced as it flapped was intense, like an M80 going off on the 4th of July before you got far enough away. Its cry was abrasive and painful to hear, like nails on a chalkboard, and I clapped my hands over my ears. The huge wings beat one final time before the bird, or whatever it was, just went. And I don't mean it flew away, I mean it disappeared right in front of us. That was the end of our hunting trip. On the drive home, we tried asking Dad what it was we had seen, but he would only shake his head. It had scared me, obviously, but in the chaos, it had actually scratched Gary. I didn't see it happen, and he said it hadn't hurt at the time, but either way, when the truck's dome light came on, you could see a long, weeping red mark across his left cheek. I used the sleeve of my jacket to wipe at the clear fluid seeping out of the wound, but it kept coming. The only thing Dad said to us as we wound back down the mountain towards Riley was to stop fussing at it. I did as I was told. Mom was still asleep when we got home, so trying to account for Gary's face was a tomorrow problem. Of course, I had no way of knowing the morning would have problems of its own. Back then, we shared a room. My bed was underneath the window, Gary's was against the far wall. On bright nights like that one, the moonlight would fall across him as he slept, and I always found that comforting. I was too young to understand why. All I knew was that looking at my little brother's chest rising and falling made me feel like everything was okay. After that, I would always let out a big breath, close my eyes, and slip away into sleep. That was the last night I was ever able to do that. I don't remember the dream that woke me up, but I do remember the sickly ache it produced in my stomach. Opening my eyes didn't make it any better because I quickly realized I couldn't move a muscle. It was like I was paralyzed. Worse than that, there was a man in our room standing over Gary. The first rays of morning were beginning to stream through the window, giving everything a golden glow completely at odds with what I was seeing. The man had no features, he was all black, and where his face should have been, there was what looked like a pile of rags. That's the best way I can describe it, at least. Despite not having a mouth, he had a voice. I could hear it. It sounded male, and it was telling Gary to come out to the forest. I tried so hard to move, to tell this person or whatever it was to stay away from my little brother, but my body wouldn't cooperate. Helplessly, I was forced to watch as Gary sat up in bed. The man blocked my view of my brother's face, but from his movements, he was going willingly. There was no tension, no fear. Gary pushed back his blankets, swiveled until I saw his pale legs hanging over the edge of the bed, then stood. That's the last thing I remember. I must have passed out or fell back asleep or something, because next I remember is waking up to chaos. Dad screaming Gary's name, Mom screaming at Dad. We never found my little brother. Sometimes I dream about him, though, and I wish I could say they were good dreams.
Fear Daily is an independent podcast hosted by Brandon Schexnayder and written by Brennan Storr. with Joanna Smith serving as the consulting editor, audio production by Rachel Boyd and sound design by Southern Gothic Media. This podcast is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and incidents are either products of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or to real events or locations, is entirely coincidental. Ad-free versions of Fear Daily are available now on your favorite podcast apps. For more information, visit feardaily.com. But move fast, before the server goes offline.